Welcome to the A New Insight podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. I follow my guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Welcome back to the New Insight podcast. We are back for our second half of our amazing interview with licensed clinical psychologist, addiction and trauma specialist, Dr. Kenneth Skale. Ken, welcome back.
Glad to be back.
Ken gave us some really incredible insight into his history, how he started out as a psychologist and then really became a specialist in addiction, personality disorders, men's issues. I cannot wait to pick his brain some more. I'm learning so much. Ken, welcome back.
Thank you. This has been fun. I really enjoyed the first half and looking forward to what we're doing here.
Me too. So, food addiction is, I think, a little controversial topic because people are like, oh, it's not necessarily a substance that is addictive. Oh, it is. I would love to kind of have you help me differentiate between food addiction and say some of the other difficulties that you might get with eating disorders, such as like binge eating, even if you're not necessarily a specialist in that area. What do you have to say about food? Can it be addictive?
I think food addiction is an addiction insofar as other behavioral addictions and substance addictions all implicate that seeking system, like we talked about in the first half of our interview. So when someone is relying on food in a way that is, I would say, less predicted by actual hunger and more by their emotional state of dysregulation, when that has negative consequences and they're unable to stop it despite trying, when they hide it and sort of create rules for themselves. I'm going to eat clean today. I'm not going to binge. I'm going to change up my diet and start this exercise routine. And then stress builds and builds and builds. And eventually that all comes crumbling down and there's a massive backslide. In all of those same ways, it very closely resembles substance addictions or pornography or gaming or other things that people would engage in. As far as how it compares to binge eating disorder, I think, as far as I understand it, and again, you're right, I'm not a food addiction expert per se, more focused on substances and other behaviors, but maybe you can help me clarify if this checks out. But I think binge eating disorder really focuses on the episodes of very discrete shoving as much food as you can in despite being uncomfortably full, feeling very guilty after. Whereas I would say food addiction is much more broad. Maybe it speaks to a more underlying pattern of an emotional function for the behavior, eating not just in discrete episodes, but throughout the day, despite when one is not despite when one is not hungry, and continuing to eat regardless of satiety, as opposed to just those discrete windows. So if you find yourself snacking all of the time, you are actually never allow yourself to experience hunger. And it always feels a bit driven. And when you don't, you experience a lot more stress. I mean, that's maybe you wouldn't meet the characteristics of a binge eating disorder, but I would say you certainly could be in the realm of food addiction. Does that check out from what?
Absolutely. I think you are completely on point. And I'd like to add that when you see difficulties with food addiction, right? Or even if it's food addiction and binge eating disorder, or just binge eating disorder, or bulimia, whatever it might be. Not so much with anorexia. But what you tend to see is that kind of reward-seeking food. It's not watermelon. It's not food that comes from close to the ground. It is usually more in the highly processed range. And knowing what I know from studying nutritional science, having some food science courses as well, is that you have a bunch of scientists, these food scientists, and they're kind of termed craveability experts. And so they
Mm.
know the combination of chemicals and additives that they can add to a food that is going to actually make people, Lay's doesn't have this motto, you can't just eat just one for no reason. Like it's
Out in the
designed.
open.
Yeah, they're like straight up like, "Hi, we're your food addiction
Mhm.
go-to." And when we look at highly processed foods, that's when I see more food addiction than anything else. I never seen a food addiction to any natural, like from the ground food. And so I think it's also how, very similar to how substances like marijuana or cocaine kind of hijack our brains and make us
Absolutely.
addicted to these substances. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, no one that I've ever met is addicted to water. There's some sort there's some sort of physical reaction, whether it's alcohol, cocaine, cake, potato chips, whatever it is, soda, that the first several times you use it, that does come with a huge surge of dopamine and other neurochemicals. And you make an association. Oh, this thing makes me feel amazing. And then in our internal hierarchy of needs, the things that we need, that gets placed right up on top for folks
Mhm,
who may struggle with some of the attachment or other kinds of traumas that we talked about in the first half.
mhm.
And so then when you feel stressed, or anxious, lonely, etc., your mind immediately goes to that
Mhm.
because seeking relationships is so much more fraught for folks in that situation. It's also just quicker and more predictable to eat something quickly that you can
Mhm.
immediately have. Oh, it's there. It's never, it doesn't require anything of you. And so in that way, I think it becomes an automatic part of your life very easily,
Yes,
just because something is so highly palatable.
exactly. And I think, it's a little harder with food. We have to eat, right? To
Mhm.
survive. We don't necessarily have to smoke. But I like to, in my treatment, especially for things like food addiction and also for smoking, is trying to find replacement behaviors or replacement foods that help kind of break that addiction. So, for example, like I'm a big proponent of there's no food that's off limits because as soon as you make
Mhm.
a food off limits, you're going to create this taboo. Oh, that food is bad. Oh, I can't have it. And then you end up eventually binging on it. And that's what I think a lot of people, how they develop things like binge eating disorder. And with food
Mhm.
addiction too, they have these certain foods. I have them play around with, well, what if that food wasn't off limits, but you got it in a different form rather than the highly processed bag of Lay's. What if you went to a restaurant that had kettle chips, right? And what if you
Mhm.
tried that and to see if that might help kind of break that automatic go to 7-Eleven, grab that thing. And I've actually found that that really helps my clients because you are doing an additional behavior and it could actually be, associated with what you were talking about before, like that kind of dopamine reward of like going to the place to get the thing. But I haven't found that with my clients. It actually breaks up the time
Mhm.
between the desire and the acquisition, and that actually slows them down enough. And especially if they're kind of out in public, if they're at a restaurant, they're much less likely to binge on it, more likely to enjoy it. And if they're doing this at the same time as opening up their diet to as much, if you're looking at on a spectrum, kind of veering away from the less healthful foods and opening up to the more healthful foods. Studies have shown this is old research, but the more your diet is in the more healthful range, the better your mental health, the better your physical health. So they start to
Mhm.
feel better and they start to leave those things behind, but without that black and white, I need this. In addition, like say for smokers, and tell me if this is something that, resonates with you. Many times smokers go out to have their smoke break because they need that break from anxiety, right? There's something happening at work, or, they're stressed out, they don't like what they're seeing, the dynamics inside are bad. They go outside, they take 10 minutes, they're slowly breathing in, slowly breathing out with the
Sure.
cigarette, right?
They
So
take
I've
more
given
mindful breaths than we do.
they do, and I'm like, "Well, what if you did that without the cigarette?"
Mhm.
And actually, that's helped a lot of my clients stop smoking, is if they can allow themselves that break and know that whatever's causing their anxiety, that's real, they're in a sympathetic nervous system response. If they can get their parasympathetic nervous system online, they automatically feel better. And of course, down the line, much better. Their lungs are functioning much better than if they went outside and had the cigarette. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know that was really long winded, but tell
Oh,
me your
that's
thoughts.
okay. I mean, the first thing when you were talking about folks changing from, let's say, full-on Lay's to kettle chips, is the idea of harm reduction.
Hmm.
When in the addiction world, that is a sort of an alternative to abstinence-based models, where you're going to go from drinking a ton to drinking zero. When it's safe enough, you can have someone slowly reduce or just sustain at some sort of lower level. And with some issues, that's appropriate. The best example I can come up with is the first thing anybody does when they go to rehab. Let's say they go to rehab for heroin use. They start smoking cigarettes, and they go through a pack a day. And I think that's not great that someone smokes. It is infinitely better than shooting heroin into your veins.
Hmm.
And so in that way, you're reducing the risk for potential harm.
Hmm.
In the same way, and this I think kind of speaks to food addiction being a legitimate construct. When I was working at the IOP a few years ago, folks would come in and from using many different substances, and they were all in sober livings after leaving a rehab. So they were in a controlled environment. There were no drugs being taken. But when you would see them make their coffee in the lobby, the amount of creamers that were put in these coffees were 50% creamer. Very sweet, probably not drinkable for a lot of folks. But that was what they were doing as an alternative to the drugs they were using. Infinitely better and healthier than whatever they were using. So I think in the same way, rather than taking something that's less harmful, the way you're talking about is, let's actually do something that's a little bit more healthy.
Hmm.
Take something that's harmful. What's the healthy version of that you could do? So the ritual is maintained, maybe. That's the ritual that's important, but it's in a way that's actually sustainable and not hurting you as much. I think that's a
Exactly.
fantastic practice to do with people.
Yes, and if you're doing that in conjunction with going really deep and working on those
Mhm.
attachment breaches and helping a client, I really do think it does come down to reestablishing that sense of safety in the
Mhm.
body and really understanding objectively what happened to cause that breach, and also that feeling of that lack of safety or the lack of being loved. And you really can start to achieve that in your life, no matter who you're surrounded by, if you're
Mhm.
cultivating that in yourself. And really, finding safety is just nervous system regulation and a lot of changing old paradigms of thought and adopting ones that are more aligned with what you want for yourself as opposed to what you're afraid of. So let's pivot a little. I want to talk about loved ones. What can they do? What can they say if they start to see some of these addictive behaviors? And how can they help their loved ones maybe come and find you, come and find someone who can
Mm.
help them?
Good question, because that's a sticky issue. What you don't want to happen is the partner being so concerned that they begin to take responsibility for the other person's health. So the partner becomes, let's say in relationship to food addiction, the partner becomes preoccupied with making sure there's only healthy food in the house,
Mm.
that they don't go to restaurants with unhealthy options, finding and throwing out the unhealthy snacks that the person they're concerned about is buying, trying to somehow have a hand in keeping the person healthy. You wouldn't want that, because that's taking responsibility for the person who's struggling's behavior. And when it comes to other things like that, it just ends up where the person who's struggling doesn't get the help that they need. And then it drives a wedge between the two.
Right.
I think what is helpful is pointing out the concern, being very honest about one's own feelings. Not, you could make some sort of factual statements about eating this much is not good for you. Maybe one example is like, oh, you already have high blood pressure and you're eating this, etc. You can also use the emotional appeal. This really scares me when you eat this way, or I feel afraid of you when you drink this much. That can really land heavily for some people. But I would say about a third of the people that come to see me, it's their wife that called and said, my husband drinks too much. I finally set a boundary with him that he has to go talk to somebody. And so I'm making an appointment for him this day and this time. And then we'll take it from there. And so at some point, drawing a very firm line that I love you to pieces, but I cannot watch you hurt yourself, and it's too stressful on me. You need to get some sort of treatment, or we can't be friends anymore. Or I need to, especially when it comes to kids, we're not going to support you anymore unless you go get help.
Wow.
Drawing that firm boundary after there's a lot of expressed concern is really important, because otherwise you just get someone who is carrying all of the emotional pain and anxiety about this condition, who's not the person doing the problem behavior. It's the spouse, it's the parent. And the other person is sort of, they're left to be more or less unconcerned because someone else is carrying all of the negative feelings about it.
Yes. I really like the emphasis on the feelings that the partner has. That I think is really important, because when you look, especially when it comes to something like food addiction, especially if the person is considered overweight or obese, and I really don't like the whole BMI classifications, and I find that really stigmatizing. But when somebody confronts them about, if it's food addiction, about their appearance, that actually is far more damaging and leads to even more food addiction or binge eating or that kind of compensatory behavior. So I want to caution people, if you're seeing people with food addiction, please do not comment on their bodies. Do not comment on their weight, even if you know that that might be something that is going to harm their health. It's really important to talk about what are they feeling? Get into like what's happening inside of you that's making you do these things. I'm just concerned about you, and coming from your own personal feelings, saying, it really scares me to see this, and I don't think that this is the most healthful behavior for you. How can we go about getting some help, because I don't have those skills? I think that that's really important. When it comes to substance use, I think it's a little bit different, right? You have a lot more potentially dangerous situations for other family members, and you can bring that into the picture so that they're made aware of that along with your feelings. So I think that that's really helpful. So anyone out there who either is experiencing this yourself or has a loved one, it's really important how you approach them. But certainly, and I'm sure you've seen success, you may just have to go make an appointment for, your loved one, because they may not be at that place, but somebody like Dr. King can get you there. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say on the point about the emotions, we want to think about what is the strongest position to approach somebody. We might think, oh, it's the reasoning. You drinking this much is impairing your performance at work. You drinking this much is expensive. The person can always and will always come back and say, I'm fine at work. It's not that much money. It doesn't actually distract me when I'm driving. I'm not any more angry. I'm just stressed at work. They can argue it all day and will. If you come and speak about your own feelings, that is inarguable. It scares me when you drink. Not you're a scary monster when you drink. Yeah, I feel afraid when you drink. And that's something that's going to land a little differently that they cannot disprove. It's your subjectivity. And assuming you're close enough to this person, they will care about that. And so that's probably the best way to approach someone, because it's also not shaming, like you don't look very good or
Yes.
you don't look like you did 5 years ago.
Yes, which is
You
the
say,
word.
I'm so worried about you.
Yeah.
That hits different.
Yes, I would agree. And that's, folks, if you ever want to go to couples counseling, couples counseling number 101, speak from your feelings first, because your loved one loves you so much. They don't want you to feel that way. And when we can learn how to speak from our feelings, we can, rather than indict, we can invite. Please see me, see what I'm, have to say, see what I'm feeling. And when you love and care for that person, you do not want them to feel that way. You'll do usually whatever it takes to stop that. I love that. So give me a picture of when somebody comes to you for treatment. What kind of therapies and approaches do you typically employ to help them move toward recovery?
The first question is, what do they identify as an internal problem?
Mm.
Not, my wife is complaining about X, or I'm having trouble at work. I really try to get people to then, okay, well, if that's the case, but how is that a problem inside for you?
Mhm.
And help them identify what's the real emotional pain point. And if that feeds into the motivational interviewing we talked about in the first segment here, is helping them to really reckon with the ambivalence. Part of them knows this is a problem. Part of them hurts and feels bad about this. Part of them sees the impairment. Part of them really wants to keep it going because it's doing something emotional for them. It's a well-worn groove. It's a ritual. It's what their family did, etc. And the more that I can get them to hold that conflict, most people, not everyone, but most people will choose to begin some sort of change process, or at least exploring the idea. So that's number one, is giving them that conflict back. I'm not going to come in very heavy-handed talking about why it's a problem, why they ought to change. I'll just sound like everyone else in their life. And the problem is when you take a stance like that, it's the human reaction to take the opposite stance. And then we believe what we hear ourselves say. So if you come in and say, this is a problem, drinking is a problem for you because of X, Y, Z, they're going to take the opposite stance and then believe what they say, which is why it's not a problem. And so you have to be pretty tactful about and respectful, giving them that conflict back. After that, once someone has begun to wrestle with that, I just invite them to explore what they want to do about it. And once someone has gotten there, you can pretty quickly formulate a plan. But I think it's that initial piece that often gets missed, and the person leaves feeling judged, shamed, more closed to future treatment, and more intent on continuing and hiding what they're doing.
I love that. And I really like that it's fluid. That you don't have a first we do this, then we do that, then we go into this. I think that we see that sometimes in addiction treatment, and we can see that backfiring. We also can see that, unfortunately, in eating disorder treatment and see it backfire. That is a whole other can of worms. It's very strict for a very good reason, and it's understandable. But you see a lot of kind of trauma that comes from eating disorder treatment and difficulties in repair work that needs to happen once somebody's like kind of given a hard line of what they should do. And I really like that you have them formulate their own plan. That might be harm reduction, that might be complete abstinence, but it really has to work individually. And I think that's probably what makes you stand out as an addiction treatment specialist. So, for somebody who is listening, who's like, "Ooh, I think I might have a problem," what's the first thing that you recommend that they do? If there's something resonating with them right now, what can they do as their first step?
I would say talk to anyone that you trust about it. Because if there's some sort of addictive process going on, no doubt there's shame about it. And the best disinfectant for shame is daylight. So sharing it with someone that you trust who cares about you, that's probably step number one. And then really taking an honest look, if you feel you're able to do that, at how is this affecting me? What's the impact on my marriage? What's the impact on my health, my work, my well-being, my general level of alertness? How is this dimming my light, you might say? And I think after that, if someone comes to the conclusion that this is a problem, there's a lot of options to go talk to somebody. So there's a ton of community groups on the substance side. You have AANA, Smart Recovery is a great one. Smart Recovery is a community-based cognitive behavioral model where there's not as much emphasis on religion or spirituality as in the AA tradition. And so people can just go and literally learn skills to stay sober and connect with other people, which is great. There's also refuge recovery, which is, you might consider that more of the Buddhist 12 steps. So folks who can't quite get on with the more westernized religious tradition in AA, they often take to refuge recovery, which is a great option, and then call a therapist. And you sort of want to think about the two things. One is, well, if this behavior is a problem for me, and I recognize that, what's the plan to get that under control? Second is, why is this here in the first place? And that might be a bit of a longer, more intensive therapy process, but to really nix it so it doesn't pop up in another kind of addiction, you'd really want to go through some sort of course of therapy where you're looking internally at what's the emotional function, what feelings of mine are not processed, what have I been through I've never talked about, and work that out.
Oh, I love that. Two great takeaways from what you just said is the best disinfectant for shame is sunlight. I've never heard that before, and I'm going to steal it. I'm keeping it. And I think asking the question, how does this dim my light? I really love that. And so I encourage everyone out there, if you are struggling in some way, really do ask yourself that question. How is this actually dimming my light? Because there is there are so many pathways that you can take. There's also Overeaters Anonymous, everybody, and certainly people out there who can help you if it's a food related addiction and things like that. You can come talk to me, of course, about that. But yes, absolutely. I think it's just shining a little light into it and then just being brave enough to reach out your hand to somebody can be that first step. So, how do people reach out to you? How do they find you? How can they work with you? I'm always recommending Dr. Ken to people who need it, but how do they find you?
Well, the feeling's mutual. I've certainly sent people your way. I think what you do is fantastic.
Thank you.
And I've appreciated being here. If people want to reach out to me, our website is pasadenahealing.com. And email address is first and last name, Kenneth Skale at pasadenahealing.com. Feel free to book a consultation, email with questions. If you need referrals somewhere where you live that's not around here, happy to help you find all of that stuff.
Absolutely. And, just on another note too, people, I run a pretty large Facebook group. It's just this labor of love that started in COVID times when everyone was looking for a therapist. It's called Therapist Client Referrals. You can email me directly and I can help you find a therapist. It's for therapists only, but you can email me at connect@anew-insight.com and say, hey, I need help finding somebody in this state who takes this insurance and I can put that referral out for you and bring back
Very
some
cool.
names for you. So there's lots of ways. There's also Psychology Today. It's a really huge database full of tons of therapists. I recommend people to go looking that way. And I'm going to put in the show links all of those recovery groups that you mentioned, because there's a few that were new to me. And I just find that that's, especially the Buddhist one, that's awesome. I didn't even know that was there. That's awesome. So,
Oh, yeah. Refuge is great.
yay. I love this. I learned a lot. Dr. Ken, thank you so much for helping me understand addiction just a little bit more.
Well, thank you for having me. This was fun. I was glad to be invited.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And we're looking forward to our next exciting interview. And I really hope you join me next time. Thanks for tuning into the A New Insight podcast.
Please remember, the contents shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anu.insight and at anu-insight.com under the Anu Insight Podcast tab. And follow us on our socials at my.anu.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.